I mean, Alan, you've in your career, you know, at the moment, you help sort of early stage SaaS business or SaaS businesses generally with their marketing. But when you sort of go into these business, how do you sort of prioritize what to do, given the sort of almost the resources and the time are against you a bit?
That is really a great question. And that's the one that I think, if there's one thing, prioritization is the big challenge, right? Because you're getting hit at it from all angles, right? So, you know, salespeople need collateral, they need localized content in some instances. You know, CEO wants this or that. You know, again, you tend to get a lot of interference in marketing from different sort of functions. And of course, everyone wants this hockey stick, you know, up to the top right, significant growth and month on month, you know, fantastic growth, right? And it's really, really challenging because, and you know, there are tools you can use, right? So I typically will use a Trello or a Teamwork type application or a Asana to kind of manage priorities. But part of it is managing stakeholder expectations because, you know, the wish list for marketing functions are ever long and ever growing. And I'm often looking around the room with some of my early stage startups. And this could be, you know, people that are at 3-5 million revenue even or have raised checks, right? And it's not like I have a team of 5 or 10, you know, and in many instances you may have one Jack or Jill of all trades followed by somebody that maybe had been hired prior to you joining, right? And they could be a graphic designer or they could be someone else. So it's really challenging, the prioritization piece. I still struggle with it, if I'm honest. I think it's, you know, because there's so many competing demands in your time. And, you know, I guess there's a couple of things that I try and do. So I had a story recently, right, whereby a classic one where a sales guy drops the head around the door. You know, I've just been talking to some VCs. We haven't been doing any webinars, you know, why haven't we been doing any webinars? And I kind of like, okay, and he's asking me to do a webinar. Can we do a webinar next month? So I'm kind of trying to unpack that in my head. And what I'm getting at is like a webinar is, you know, there's one person in the marketing function and sort of, you know, like that is a fairly significant amount of time hours. Or if I looked at from start to finish, the amount of hours that you've got to put in to do a webinar from scratch. But then you get to the point is nobody might show up, right? Because your traffic on your website isn't strong enough so you've got to pay 5 or 10 grand to partner with somebody. Yeah. So that's the kind of example of someone that kind of drops in will we do a webinar, not really understanding that is almost an unreasonable request for an early stage startup. Whereas actually if it was, well, actually, Alan, we need more leads. That's a slightly different question then. So if that's the reason you want to propose it. You know, maybe we can come up with another solution. So, it's a really tricky one. I try and I'm kind of laboring the point a little bit, but I try and have a process, right, so that at least there's some sort of order to it. It needs to be fluid, right? There's always things going to change, and then I'm trying to kind of, you know, whatever's closest to cash is often the way I will do it. So focusing on things, so that could be. If there's an RFP or RFQ that needs to be responded to and we need a nice deck for it, that's close to cash. Google Ads are often typically closest to cash because you can spike leads by, you know, by putting more cash into Google Ads. So, you know, it might be building landing pages. They would get a priority. A webinar would probably be downgraded because I view that as a high risk, high cost type scenario that would have low probability of a return. So there's some, again, be interesting your thoughts. Have you kind of any tips that you might share that would help?
I mean, I think you're touching on the sort of framework that I was thinking of, and you see the sort of framework's been used by growth marketers a little bit more because they go sometimes a bit deeper into things like, you know, changing the landing page, changing the product sometimes with new features, as well as kind of that marketing piece. But, you know, they draw up that framework of sort of, you know, high reward versus reward versus cost, or you know, time needed, and they'll sort of map it out in terms of, okay, well, what do we think is actually going to work really well, and then actually how much time and effort is it going to take, and they can sort of start to plot which is the high reward stuff versus which is the high reward and the low effort. And they sort of just literally start chunking it down from that. And that's how they sort of tend to prioritize it. But
that's exactly it. I mean, the only other thing to throw into the mix is whether there's dependencies or not, because that's a key thing that junior marketers don't realize, right, is that there's a huge amount of dependencies. And of course, it's with busy people, right? So one of my companies I've worked with was in cybersecurity. And that's a real challenging area for marketing because it's almost impossible to get somebody that's got marketing and cyber security experience, right? I mean, they just don't exist, right? So the challenge there is content creation, right? So you're really dependent on your thought leaders that are, exceptionally busy. So you'll often find in instances like that, you just simply can't prioritize things like content creation, even though it is useful from an SEO and kind of cost of acquisition point of view. Content is often really, really important, but you just can't move the needle on it because you've got too many dependencies on fee earners, often if it's professional services, or even if it's a pure SaaS, that the one or two domain experts, you'll often find they may not be able to communicate well. They're very technical, right? But they're not able to kind of identify, here's a thought leadership piece that we should write that should have these keywords in it. They don't have that. So you kind of have to prioritize also based on your context. And then the kind of last point to watch is that a lot of the playbooks we get, Matt, are coming across from the US, right? And often, that's where we read and that's where we listen to, anybody that I listen to or read in this area typically are in the US, right? I go back to an earlier point. They've got resource abundance. We've got resource constraints. So they're advising you from the world of 10 people in marketing and we can have the latest tech stack, we can have the greatest tech stack because we got loads of cash. The kind of more lean model is much more challenging. And another kind of point on it is that, like, you can struggle to get statistical significance on B2B sites. So it's easy to say, go test all these landing pages and we can kind of pick the winner. That's not really that easy on a B2B SaaS site because your traffic volumes are typically quite low. And then the kind of geeky point to be aware of is that actually most traffic that you see in Google Analytics is overstated by 30 or 40%. And you got to take that off. So you might think you've actually got 5,000 visits a month. The reality is it's probably closer to 2,000. Because why? You've got people coming in to log into the website, that's counted. You've got internal IP traffic, people on the site. You get bots, and you can see the bots, they're the people that are staying less than a second. So there's all these, things that are kind of making it kind of, tricky to kind of actually test. So anyway, I'm going off the point a little bit, but
I'm expecting you to have 8 pairs of hands. I can't see with all this stuff you're doing.